I've made a lot of bags and I've made a lot of totes. This newest design is called the Right Turn bag. I love the simple shape, but I love how elaborate the front is. It features this beautiful strip piecing along the front that takes a right turn, which you can decide to either point down or point up. It's got one nice sturdy strap. It's lined on the inside and has a very convenient magnetic closure. I also have some solids in there so I can show off some gorgeous decorative stitching, and these are just a few of the over 400 stitches that are in the Janome Horizon Memory Craft 12,000. Strip piecing is really so simple. I can't wait to show you how easy this comes together. This bag is a stunner. I love the size of this bag. It has a great carry-all size for everything that I need now, and probably some things I'm expecting to need soon. I love the simple shape, but I love how elaborate the front is. It features this beautiful strip piecing along the front that takes a right turn, which you can decide to either point down or point up. Be sure and download and print out the instruction PDF, which is going to give you some very specific sizes of how you're going to cut your materials and exactly how much yardage of each that you're going to use. I always start by just pulling out my favorite prints, and once I've done that and coordinated a few together, I lay them all out to see how the front of the bag is looking. And that's going to help you decide maybe what solids that you'd like to choose. And the solids are really important in this project because you want those decorative stitches to stand out really beautifully. And all those colors of prints and solids are going to help you determine what fabric you might want to use for the back of the bag, the straps, the lining. Should you want to add any ribbon, you can sort of coordinate that in as well. And it also is going to help determine what colors of thread you're going to use for your decorative stitching. I chose about 7 or 8 to start with. I didn't necessarily use all of them, but I used some variegated threads, some cotton, some polyester, just a mix, and it's going to be beautiful. So once you've decided what colors you want to use, you can gather all the rest of your materials and we're going to get started. I already have all the pieces of my bag cut except the strip piece front. I've cut the interfacing, a foundation front, and the lining, and the back, and the straps for the bag. And now I'm working on those strip pieces. First thing I do after I lay up a couple of my printed fabrics, as well as I got a solid in there, 2 or 3 at a time is usually good. I use my quilting ruler and rotary cutter to just clean off one edge here so we can start nice and fresh and straight. So I'm going to do that now by lining this up with my mat. And now it's just a process of cutting several strips from all of these prints, and I cut them at various widths. I usually don't cut any that are smaller than about 1.5 inches and all the way up to about 2.5 inches and anywhere in between. Keep in mind that these sizes that you're cutting now are going to shrink by 1/2 inch because we're going to take 1/4 inch seam allowances. Let's do this one at say 2 1/4. Okay, we've been through this print, so now I'm going to work in cutting some new prints here. And keep cutting until I have a nice big pile of strips for patchwork. You could cut more than 2 at a time, but to keep my variation between widths and prints, I'm going to just do a few at a time. I have the foundation for my strip piecing laid out here, and it's already been interfaced on the back. It's time now for me to mark it and prepare it down the center. And this piece is 25 inches wide, so up near the top, I'm going to find the 12.5 mark and put 1 dot, and then I'm going to do that again down towards the bottom. And 12.5. Now I'm going to use one line between those 2 dots to connect. So I'm dividing down the center of this foundation piece. Really, this could be just even a lead pencil because it's not going to get seen. I just happen to have these water-soluble markers around a lot. The next thing that I want to do is to make some angled lines as guides to begin the strip piecing on a 45-degree angle. It's really cool to be able to have this square grid here. In fact, you could even just cut out a piece of square cardboard to do this as long as your edges were nice and square. And I've lined the points up with the blue line, and I'm just going to draw an angled line on one side and then also on the other side. And then just to continue it so it goes all the way down, I'm going to slide down and line up just so that I can make that straight line go all the way out to the edge. And now I'm going to slide over to the other side and do the same thing. I just want those lines to go all the way from the center to the outer edge. I'm going to switch back to my longer straight edge here, and I'm going to cut down that center line. Don't be scared. Divide this guy in half so that we can piece them separately so they'll be unique and really cool once we join them back together. Now I want to point out how foundation strip piecing works for you. I'm just going to choose at random 2. Lay it down with the wrong side against the foundation piece, butt the fabric up right up against the blue line there. Make sure also that you have an extension of this strip off both sides of the foundation of about 1 or 2 inches. And then we'll grab one more. But this time I'm going to lay it with its right side facing down, so right sides are together and right on top. Now that those are in line, I'm going to pin it in place, and I'm going to go through all 3 layers, both strips and also the interfaced foundation. And you don't need to mark out this whole thing, because once you have those straight line established and your strips are cut nice and straight, you can continue to piece just based off what you started. We're going to sew along this 1/4 inch seam allowance from that blue line that's drawn on the fabric. And I can find the 1/4 inch line on my A foot here that comes with the machine. I've got my straight stitch selected, and I want to adjust the length of my stitches from the default here. I'm going to go from 2.2 up to 2.8, let's say 8, and it's so cool how this digital display shows you how your stitches are growing. Okay, we have our first 2 strips sewn on. You know, that interfacing on here really keeps a foundation nice and stable, because remember, you are sewing on a bias angle here, which sometimes can stretch out. If you want to stop and press with an iron, that's totally fine, but I like to just stay seated, keep sewing, and kind of use my fingers to press back a crease. And what we can do next is grab another strip. And I sort of compose as I go. I look at the colors and like them to contrast as I'm going. This will be a nice contrast against that paler yellow. I get to the point where I don't want to pin every single line. I like making sure that first line is established with pins. But from here on out, I'm just going to sew. All right, I'm going to sew just the way I did the first time. Slide it underneath. I can kind of feel with my finger underneath that I've got that fabric pressed back neatly. And again, if you want to use your iron, it's totally fine. I'm just going to continue now laying my strips as I go, kind of composing the design and color arrangement, responding to whatever I just sewed previously. Right sides down against the strip that you just sewed, and continue all the way up to the top corner, and then you can do that from the center down to the bottom corner. And once we have that prepared, it's going to be time to do some decorative stitching on top of this. I've completed all the strip piecing on 1/2 of this bag front. You can see my foundation layer here, and it's got the strips hanging off all edges. So now it's time to use some of those gorgeous decorative stitches and embellish these solid areas. I've chosen from some of the thread colors that I have, and I've got the machine loaded with this nice dark gray thread here that I think is going to show up really pretty on the red. And you can see this layout of all these gorgeous decorative stitches that the machine has. You can also find those in this digital display over here. I'm going to select this heirloom category. It's got lots of pretty stitches, and I can scroll through with these arrows to find one that I like. These are cool. They look kind of like cross stitches. I'm going to choose that one. And you can see a digital display of what a longer length of these stitches looks like. And just like with our straight stitch, you can adjust the width of the stitch and also how far apart the stitches are. You can see this is already maxed out here at the 9 width, but what if I want it to take up a little bit less space? I'm just going to hit those minus marks down and down and down. And you can actually see on the digital display at the left here that it's shrinking the size. And now that they kind of look like long X's, I might want them just a little closer together. So I'm going to shorten that up to get those set again. So many awesome things. Let's start embroidering with that now. I'm going to slide the fabric in now. I'm going to sew down the middle of this red solid piece here. I've got the F-foot on the machine, which is perfect for your decorative stitching. And I'm just going to kind of guide it, eyeballing it really, in between these two side seams. But if you wanted to draw a line on your fabric with a water-soluble pen, that's awesome too, because this foot comes with a little red arrow that you can keep your stitching in line. Let's start sewing. The feed on this machine is so nice and accurate. You don't really have to steer it as much as you can just gently guide the fabric. All right, first row done. I love how that looks. I think I'm going to use a bright yellow now and choose a stitch to go on either side of the center design. Okay. I have finished one front half of the patchwork. I've got my strip piecing, some ribbon applique, and this beautiful decorative stitching. I'm going to do this now on the other half with just a different arrangement of fabrics, ribbon, and decorative stitching, and then we'll be ready to trim them and seam them together. It's time now to trim out the front of this piece. I've already got one of them trimmed, and your instructions are going to give you the specific measurement of trimming the large size down to 23 by 12. But first I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to just trim around the foundation piece to get these extra little pieces off. Then I'm going to worry about getting my very specific measurement. So I'm lining up the edge with the foundation piece. Lots of times strip piecing can kind of move your foundation piece out of place or stretch it, but because we have that interfacing, it keeps it nice and still. I'm going to slide this down and do the top now. Okay. Okay, last edge. Let's have a look at the front. Nice. Okay, now we want to get this specifically 23 by 12 so it matches the other one. Lay it right here. There might be a little squaring up you're still going to have to do, but you can take care of that now. You can see I've got it really close to 23 here. But I want to use my straight edge to make it nice, clean, and square. Okay, and now I'm going to flip it the other way. Make sure I have it at 12. Just barely fits on this mat. So when I get my side edge lined up, it's just about a little over 12 now, but you can see it's kind of going off square-wise a little bit. So I'm going to straighten that up. Awesome. Now I just need to decide which edges I want to sew together. And it doesn't make a big difference, but you can see this layout. I've got the embroidery coming right into each other here, but if you flipped it over like this, the embroidery would be coming together up here. And now all I need to do is use a 1/2 inch seam allowance with a straight stitch and seam down the center. I think I like this arrangement the best. So I'm going to place them right sides together. Align those edges, and sew. 1/2 inch seam allowance. Pretty. Now we just need to press the seam allowance open and it'll be ready to assemble into the bag. It's time now to begin the bag assembly. I have all the pieces for the bag prepped and ready to go. I've got 2 strap pieces that have both been interfaced with my fusible interfacing. I have the lining pieces and they both have the snaps, the magnetic snaps installed here. And then I have the bag front, which has been seamed and pressed, interfaced, of course, from the very beginning, and also the bag back, which has been interfaced. I want to mention too that even if your bag front didn't turn out to be the exact dimensions as called for on the pattern PDF, you want to make sure that whatever dimensions that it ended up to be, that the bag back and also both lining pieces are exactly the same. I'm going to start first by finishing up this strap, and we're going to do that by putting right sides together and sewing a 1/2 inch seam allowance down one side. Okay, now we need to do a few pressing steps. First, we're going to press open the center seam that we just made, and then we're going to fold these long edges in by about a 1/2 inch and press a nice crease on both sides. After that, we can fold the strap back towards itself, wrong sides together, and top stitch down both edges, and we'll have a finished strap. So I'm going to press that center seam open. Now I'm going to fold in the outer edges by a 1/2 inch or so. I'm going to eyeball it. I don't need to measure that. In fact, if it looks about the same as your seam allowance, then you know you've got it at a 1/2 inch. Now I'm going to do the other side. Okay, now final pressing step. After I've folded it over towards itself, wrong sides together, you want to align those folded edges, and that seam is going to be at your outer edge. Let's press it all together. So now this is pressed, and I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance to top stitch down both edges. You can pin it if you want to, but I find that this interfacing stabilizes it really well, and it's going to sit still for me. Now we're going to stitch down the other edge. Okay, the strap is complete. I'm gonna set that aside, and I think I'll start by putting the outer pieces together first. I'm just gonna turn them right sides together. Big bag. And we're just gonna sew in a U shape down one side, across the bottom, and back up the other side in one continuous seam. I'm gonna pin this in place at the top corner, and then also at the bottom corner. Okay. Now let's sew it with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I've now sewn the lining just like I did the outer bag with that U-shaped seam, but I left an opening in the middle of the bottom of about 10 inches so I can pull the bag through when we're finished. Now I just need to press all these seams open at the ironing board, and we'll get ready to do our box corner. Now that all the seams are pressed, I'm going to work on creating the box corners for both the outer bag and the lining bag. To do that, you're going to want to pull the front and back away from each other to start forming a triangular corner. The goal then is to line up the press seam from the bottom and the press seam from the side so that they're in line with one another. And this really sort of starts out by eyeballing it, but then you can feel with your hand and your fingers whether you've got the seams in line, which I think I do now. And I'm going to put a pin there to keep it in place through all layers. We're going to draw a line across here, and that's going to give us a line to sew directly onto. So I'm going to open it all the way up and lay it down flat. This box corner is going to give the bag a 4-inch deep side. To get a 4-inch deep side with our box corner, we want to measure 4 inches across. But first I'm going to line up the 2 with this seam here, and I'm going to keep sliding the 2 line down the seam until I've gotten to the point where the 4 is at this outer edge and the 0 is at this outer edge. And now I'm going to use my water-soluble pen here to draw a line across. And I'm going to stitch right onto that line. Okay, now I'm going to trim off this triangular corner, leaving about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Marking out the box corner, sewing across it, and trimming off the edge. Now we're going to do the same process on the other bottom corner of the outer bag, on both bottom corners of the lining, then we'll be ready for the final assembly step. I've got all my box corners complete, and I'm just doing the final little pressing out with my hands here, turning this outer bag right side out. The inner bag, the lining, needs to stay wrong side out. And now it's time to do the final step of sewing the top edges together. But first I want to include the strap in that. And I'm going to do that by placing one end of the strap centered over the side seam of the outer bag. I'm going to pin it in place. Do it on both sides here so I'm sure it's there. And then make sure you don't twist your strap. Now I need to set this whole outer bag with the pinned on strap down inside the lining, which is wrong side out, so that what's happening is the right sides of the lining and the outer bag are together. While this is a little fidgety, the goal is to get the side seams aligned and the top edges in line as well. I'm going to start pinning together by using the strap pins. I've got the side seam of the lining and the side seam of the outer bag in place, and you can see the pins here from the strap. I'm just going to pinch with my fingers to keep everything in place and pull the pin out, and now use it to put all layers together. And then I'll do the same on the other side. The inner side seam, outer side seam. Pinch it all in place. It's a lot of layers, which is why I like to use long pins right here. Okay, now you can continue pinning around the top. Right now is a good time to make sure that the circumference of your lining and of your outer bag is the same, and you'll know that it is or that it isn't by whether these are fitting together. If you find any difference, you might want to take up the seam or let out the seam of the lining just a little bit to make sure that they accommodate each other well. And this looks like it's lining up great. First, I'm going to remove this extension table. All right, I have the seam sewn all the way around the top. Now it's time to use that opening in the lining to pull the right outer side of the bag through carefully so you don't pop any stitches in that seam. It's my favorite part. We want to have a look to make sure our straps got included in that seam really nicely. Looks great. So let's pull this all the way out now. We're looking at the right side of both the outer bag and the lining. We're going to tuck the lining back in just a minute, but first we want to close up that opening. And because I've pressed it nicely, I have two creases that I can just join together. You could hand stitch this, but because it's going to be down inside the bag, it's just as easy to do a little top stitching right on the edge there, because no one's going to see it. I'm going to do this seam right on the edge, just at the 1/8 inch line there. All right, we've closed up the hole in the bottom of the lining, and now I'm going to return the lining down into the inside of the bag, and I'm going to give this a quick press all the way around the top so that the seam is at the very outer edge. And now I'm going to top stitch. I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance. That was the last step. I absolutely love this bag. we showed you just the tiniest bit of what this Janome 12,000 can do. All the Janome models that I've worked on have the same capabilities of beautiful, accurate stitching, decorative stitches, and this bag is a stunner. I love the size of this bag. It has a great carry-all size for everything that I need now, and probably some things I'm expecting to need soon.